So, welcome from me. Great that you come to us this evening for this second lecture on Europe. I'm Andreas Poltermann, from head of Heinrich Böll Foundation, Belgrade. We organized this, Heinrich Böll Foundation and Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, organized this second lecture on Europe because we want to offer the Serbian public the opportunity to take part in the debate on Europe's future, its institutional structure, as well as the future of its political economy and the prospects of the accession countries. Almost every day, the Serbian government claims that accession to the European Union is its strategic goal. What that might mean remains quite unclear, particularly when one takes into account Serbia's leaning towards Russia and its system of authoritarian rule and its oligarch-dominated economy. However, we are told that the EU accession process aims at modernizing Serbia's legal, economic and institutional system. This catch-all phrase conceals the fact that the course this modernization should take is highly controversial in Europe, and it should become an issue of public debate in Serbia as well. That's why we need a debate on Serbia's transformation into a EU member state. And that's why I'm very much pleased that Professor Wolfgang Streeck, one of Germany's leading, though with regard to the EU, anything but mainstream social scientist, has made it to Belgrade to give us food for thought and make the case for and provide us with arguments against how European transformation is currently working. He will be introduced to you by Mariam from Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory. Thanks from my side. Maya, the floor is yours.
So, I would like to introduce our guest this evening, Wolfgang Streeck. Wolfgang Streeck is a world-renowned economic sociologist and emeritus director of the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies in Cologne. He was professor of sociology at the University of Cologne and of sociology and industrial relations at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and he has previously held positions all across the world in Frankfurt, New York, Münster, Florence, Berlin, and many other places. He graduated in sociology from the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt, then pursued graduate studies at the Columbia University in New York, and then completed his habilitation in 1986 in Bielefeld. He is an honorary fellow of the Society for the Advancement of Socioeconomics and a member of the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences, as well as the Academia Europaea. Wolfgang Streeck's primary area of research is the political economy of capitalism, and in this area he has developed a specific dialectical approach to institutional analysis, a specific school within political economy. Professor Streeck has written extensively on the political economy of Germany and more recently has involved himself in debates over the politics of austerity, the rise of what he terms the debt state as a result of the neoliberal revolution of the 1980s and the future of the European Union. Some of his books include How Will Capitalism End? Essays on a Failing System this year, Buying Time, The Delayed Crisis of Democratic Capitalism 2014, Politics in the Age of Austerity 2013, Reforming Capitalism, Institutional Change in the German Political Economy, and Social Institutions and Economic Performance. To the broader public, Professor Streeck is probably best known for his influential End of Capitalism thesis, where he presents a very original and thoughtful revisiting of the theme of the imminent end of capitalism, which figures in the work of almost every influential theorist of capitalism since Marx, such as Weber, Zombat, Polanyi, Schumpeter, and Keynes. However, on the grounds of solid empirical evidence, Streeck argues in an innovative way that capitalism is indeed in a terminal crisis caused by three interrelated processes: the inevitable decline of the profit rates and economic growth in the industrialized world, constantly growing inequalities, and the global growth of indebtedness. These processes are irreversible, Streeck argues, and they undermine the central promise of capitalism that has so far legitimized it, the promise of endless growth. And the originality of this perspective is best observed in the causal explanation of the end of capitalism. It is not just the structurally built-in deficiencies of capitalism, according to Professor Streeck, but rather their combination with an unprecedented historical success of capitalism that will lead to its inevitable demise. It is capitalism's triumph in the Cold War and the successful neoliberal evolution of the last 3 decades that have eviscerated the hugely important countervailing political forces in the West and globally, left and social democratic parties, trade unions, etc. I'm saying all this to give you a bit of a context for this evening's lecture. So Wolfgang Streeck's perspective is very close to another influential institutionalist, Jeffrey Hodgson, who was also our guest here at the Institute last March, who argues that capitalism can only survive if it does not destroy its own non-capitalist foundations, which is called the impurity principle. And this evening, Professor Streeck's lecture bears the title European Union as a Transformative Power, Capitalism, Democracy and Modernization in Europe at Europe's Periphery. It will address the role of European Union underlying Germany's identification of the European idea with a single European currency. Without further ado, I give the word to Professor Streeck.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Next time I give a lecture somewhere else, I will fly you in. You can summarize one half of my lecture already in advance. You heard the title of this presentation, which is not from me, it is from our host. Capitalism, Democracy and Modernization at Europe's Periphery, the European Union as a Transformative Power. I think this is the title for a very fat book. Yeah. And I could not possibly summarize this here, but what I will do is I will speak about 4 key terms of this: capitalism, democracy, modernization, and the European Union. And the common element in them is that they denote something that has become extremely unstable in recent years. So all across the topology of themes, we find instability, unpredictability, an uncertain future, uncertainty. And I don't want to speak too long, in spite of the huge substance before me. I will explain why I think that that the notion of an era of uncertainty and instability makes sense. And then afterwards, I invite you to ask questions and make comments, and then we can more precisely focus on the subjects that are central to your own interest in this context. So I'll try to be short, although I'm not always successful in this. First of all, capitalism. Lion briefly mentioned that we are observing 3 long-standing trends in global modern capitalism: declining growth, rising inequality, and rising indebtedness, overall indebtedness. And they all sort of have been running in parallel for a very long time. Let me make a short methodological remark here. I am not talking about snapshots, I'm talking about historical trends. And trends, in my view, are much more important than differences at a given point in time, because if something has been underway for 20 or 30 years, it has sort of eaten itself into the fabric of a society, and it becomes very difficult to undo such a trend. This is not a problem of finding the right button to push so that equilibrium is being restored. It is a problem of identifying forces that could revert a powerful long-term historical development. That's a very different problem. In fact, the reason why this comes with great uncertainty is that if we go by standard economics, then I'll try my best. Yeah.
No, it's not better.
Yeah. And, okay. This will incapacitate my left arm, but be it so. And so these three trends, as I say, in standard economics, they should not exist. They should not coexist. High inequality is supposed to generate high growth, at least under the neoliberal paradigm. The more rewards you offer to the rich, and the more punishment you hand out to the poor, both will work harder as a result. It's a sort of split anthropology, a sort of dual theory of motivation. The rich work more if you don't tax their results, or if they get more profit. The poor work more if you take away their money. Then in any case, inequality in this context does not come with high growth, it comes with low growth. In fact, now we're seeing that high inequality may actually be a cause of low growth because it comes with low demand in the Keynesian sense. Low demand means that that investment is not productive, and it goes into debt and financial investment. So high debt, which should also spur growth, actually may be a concomitant of low growth because of low demand. And so on and so on. We see that it may be that these three trends, which I call the three apocalyptic horsemen of modern capitalism, that they actually reinforce each other rather than even each other out. That will be a positive feedback effect that is very difficult to overcome. Let me say that among those who are running the modern capitalist system in the central banks, in the economics department of Harvard and other places, now the term of secular stagnation has become prominent, popular. Secular, it's very unclear what they mean by this. Many different explanations are being put forward. But everybody is puzzled about the fact that zero interest rates, the unlimited production of money, that all of this is not able to refuel economic growth. It's a sort of mystery to standard economics. Another aspect of this general uncertainty about the economic performance of modern capitalism is the absence of financial reform. 2008 we saw how dangerous an underregulated financial system is, and all sorts of projects were made to better organize, better regulate global finance. It is obviously very little has happened between then and now. It's already 8 years past, and there are many people in the economics world, even not necessarily on the left, that are convinced that at some stage there can at any point be a rerun of the 2008 crisis. Now the latest candidate is Deutsche Bank of all institutions. And of course, the Italian banking system comes immediately afterwards, or they come together. And then these are units that are still too big to fail. And we were promised in 2008 that such units would be decomposed, so this would not happen. First point, that is, capitalism is in a condition of high uncertainty and high risk, and we do not know what is going to happen in the immediate or near or even middle term future with the performance of the capitalist economy. I have emphasized this in order to make sure that when we talk about Europe, and then we talk about the periphery and Europe, we understand that this happens in a context where capitalism is no longer to be taken for granted as a force that will settle everything. Sometimes in Europe, when people, intellectuals, political scientists, politicians, when they speak about the crisis, on the one hand they know that there's something wrong, but when they begin to talk about Europe, everything seems to be easily feasible if only there would be more demand in the European economy, if only this would be done or that would be done. I want to make sure that we understand that these trends that I've described affect all capitalist countries. There's very little variation between them. If you take one given year, then you see, the British economy grew 0.5% faster than the German economy, or vice versa. But if you look over the long term, the three apocalyptic horsemen sort of are riding together, and they are helping each other. Okay, I move this away here. Second point, democracy. Now, democracy is another field that we can no longer take for granted. The post-war Western standard model of democracy, parliamentary elections, political parties, mostly center-right and center-left, and then a few additions, governments put in by majority parliament, all decisions being made with the elected parliament in control, plus trade unions and free collective bargaining as a second channel of democratic participation. That model is in serious jeopardy in most of our countries. Why is that so? Since the 1980s, electoral participation has gradually declined, and it has in almost all countries, in fact in all countries, at different speeds. It has mostly declined at the bottom level of the income distribution. Poor people have ceased to vote. Political parties have lost membership. In most countries, the number of political party members over a period of 1985 to now has been cut in half, if not worse. There's very few exceptions. Greece, Serbia, places where party membership is something other than simply political participation, maybe the condition for a career in the public sector. Where there is clientelism, political parties have grown in importance. Where there is not, parties have become, as Peter Mayer has shown, withdrawn into the state apparatus in order to, because they were unable to combine two things. One is responsiveness to their members, and the other is responsibility in terms of the policies that they pursue. This tension between the demands of the voters and that which parties could do in government was resolved by parties becoming more bureaucratic, moving out of the connection with civil society and turning into quasi-state institutions. That's something we also know in Yugoslavia from previous times, parties that become element of the state. And something like that has happened in quite a few countries, cutting off the relationship between the political system and social life. Now, what is behind this? And on the surface, we can describe this as the rise of a pensée unique, unified worldview thinking among political parties, regardless of what their tradition was. But if you look at it, a neoliberal pensée unique, if you want, but if you look at the conditions under which this happened, in a nutshell, what we've seen during this period that I'm referring to is a change from a world in which markets were embedded in states to a world in which states are embedded in markets, in which they have to compete with each other for capital, and in which the most important policy for governments, regardless of political coloration, is to increase the so-called competitiveness of the whole society in the market, sometimes the market for capital, and that clearly means that you have to cut down on public spending, that you have to have more flexible labor markets, that you have to have an educational system that rewards skills that are marketable in the labor market, and so on and so on and so on. So this very fundamental structural change in the 1980s and 1990s up to now was basically a common goal of both parties, the Social Democratic Center and the Conservative or Christian Democrat or whatever the center was in a given country. And the differences between parties were extremely difficult to see. For the voters at the lower end of the income distribution, they didn't matter. So they dropped out of the process. A world in which democracy is in this sense neutralized can be described as a world of post-democracy. More precisely speaking, a world in which the democratic institutions and what they do are decoupled from the political economy of a society. Politics becomes almost like entertainment kind of thing, basically staged by advertising agencies, and whereas the real economic, political problems of a society are being treated somewhere else, outside of the system of political participation. Now, increasingly, this somewhere else has become international organizations like the European Union, like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, but also national central banks, the central banks of the most important nation states. And central banks are institutions that, in the same process that I'm describing, in the 1980s and 1990s, were made independent by governments, whereas up to this time they were more or less closely linked to the finance ministries of a country in the pursuit of monetary stability, which was in the pursuit of international competitiveness. Central banks became sort of autonomous, and they now are, as we know from everyday reporting in the quality newspapers, they are now the basic agents of economic policy. But what the central bank does happens and has to happen behind closed doors. You do not know what they are doing and why they are doing it, or they have only very carefully filtered explanations, which of course cannot be debatable, because otherwise the markets might react in panic. Yeah? So Mario Draghi has become the president of the European Central Bank, has become the most important economic policy maker for Europe, for the monetary union. Second most important is the Council of Heads of State and Government, which where mechanisms are active that we describe as multi-level diplomacy, meaning that Frau Merkel or whoever goes to Brussels, they make a compromise, and they go back home and they say, this was the best I could get. And if you touch this, all sorts of hell will break loose. We cannot open this compromise again. So the executive is enormously strengthened in a world in which Most decisions are made in international conferences. So we call this post-democracy. I have referred to it as the rise of a Hayekian political economy as opposed to a Keynesian political economy. Now, the difference between the two is, if you remember the basic growth doctrine of John Maynard Keynes, capitalist economies grow through spending, through effective demand. Effective demand happens if you take money away from those who cannot or do not want to spend it because they have too much, and give it to those who need the money urgently and who don't save it because they need something right now. In other words, by redistribution from the top to the bottom, through democratic politics, because democracy is needed for this, democracy being a mechanism by which those at the lower end of society can make themselves heard, one man, one woman, one vote, as opposed to the market, where the rule is $1 or whatever the currency is, one vote. Yeah? So that those at the top vote much more effectively with their money. The Keynesian growth model was one growth through democracy, through redistribution to the bottom. The Hayekian model is the opposite. The neoliberal model, growth through incentives for those at the top to make even more profit, and therefore, in this sense, work harder and take it away from those at the bottom who only waste the money and don't invest it. Now, this coincides with the rise in inequality. Obviously, inequality is part of the growth model, which requires the suspension of democratic politics, which is fortified by the fact that those at the bottom of a society become so discouraged that they don't go to vote anymore, so that even the former social democratic parties, whose voters these were, first of all become smaller, and secondly, as importantly, cater more to the center and leave these people out who don't vote anyway. Yeah? So here we, this is inequality. Inequality and goes together with oligarchy. Oligarchy goes together with corruption. And if there's one thing that we've seen in particular in the United States, which is the most important country anyway, and when they elect their president, they in many ways elect our president as well, and your president also. So when they elect their president, you see that running a moderate election campaign in the United States requires $1 billion. And you have to get those dollars from somewhere. And where is the money? The money is where the money is, which is in Wall Street and in the financial sector. I just want to mention what I mentioned this morning. Clinton speaking at 250 managers at Goldman Sachs and collecting $325,000 for one lecture. But she gave 3 lectures a year. And so this enormous, pile of money that the Clinton family accumulated since they left the White House is unbelievable, and it's beyond imagination. But this is only a small part of the story. In order to, if I may, take 5 minutes to describe how a capitalist oligarchy works. Yeah? The oligarchy means may mean many things. So in some countries, it means that the rich are actually governing. Like, take for example, Ukraine and the president, who is the chocolate magnate of Ukraine. But there are other oligarchs, other types of oligarchs who have others to govern for them. Like, for example, Clinton and her gang. And in this world, the story is that in America you can see that the very rich the 0.1% of the income distribution, who are unbelievably rich. If you look at the statistics, if you want, there's a book by Jeffrey Winters on oligarchies, who compared income relations all over the world and all over history. In a nutshell, now the relationship between the material power, as he calls it, of the upper 100 families in the United States as compared to the average citizen in the United States, the distance is the same as that between a Roman senator in the 1st century and a slave. Yeah? So, yeah, of course, these statistics, but Winters is a very careful researcher. Now, oligarchs in a democracy where they do not govern, you will find that they have very different worldviews. So some may be for gay marriage, others may be against abortion. Another oligarch may want to fund poor people in Africa, and all of this. Very diverse group. But as Winters shows, they are united in one thing. That is in defending their property. That is and then for this, what he describes as a unique American institution, the wealth defense industry, which consists of the smartest lawyers that are produced in Harvard, the smartest economists that are produced in Princeton. They are being hired by the very rich to invent reasons why they should not pay taxes, to find places in the world where they can locate their money, to write stories for the newspapers about the philanthropy that these people engage in. And the wealth defense industry is sort of, for a democracy, the most important mechanism to protect inequality. Is the absolute opposite of what we mean when we talk about democracy. Now, so this was the second place where uncertainty and instability are visible. In particular now, in the last 3 or 4 years, in which something very interesting happens in many countries, including the United States, that those at the lower end of the income distribution are no longer passive, but they are returning to politics by voting for sometimes quite ugly characters, like, for example, Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen. The rise of populism on the background of 30 or 40 years of increasing inequality is a very important development, in the sense that now the attempt to revive the egalitarian redistributive component of democracy is being made by people who can, in many cases, be justly described as anti-democratic, and using the democratic system for their combined purpose. Yeah? This is another reason why, for example, the managers of our public lives, like the established political parties, the government, will now tell us that democracy is sort of a very tricky, difficult thing. Don't overdo it with democracy, because then these people have too much on the say. The process of de-democratization may well become a process of fighting so-called populism. I move to my third site, which is the concept of modernization. And here I simply want to refer to the structure of modern statehood, of states. Never never since the Second World War was the structure of states as units of governance more in question than it is today. Brexit is one of the examples, but there are many more examples. We now see widespread experimentation with the scale of governance, which is not surprising if you remember, the situation of states being involved in markets rather than the other way around. What is the right size for a political community to survive in a competitive global market? Is it the traditional nation state of the size of, let's say, Britain or Germany? Is it a supranational super state, like the dream of Herr Juncker and Herr Schulz and others? Sorry, this is too cold outside, so we slowly get into the time of getting cold. Is it the super state, or is it the subnational state? For example, Catalonia or Scotland. Where is the right level of governance, and how are these units to be linked to each other? Size becomes a critical issue. Scotland, for example, would like to break away from the United Kingdom. At the same time, they want to be members of the European Union. Yeah? It is full of contradictions and questions and open problems, because nobody knows what the right size of the state will be. There is the assumption that really big states, like China or the United States, will govern the future. But really big states are vulnerable. Look at the United States now. Yeah. It is a giant in decline. Look at China, which is a country that is indebted to an extent, as recent research has shown, that even exceeds that of the United States. Look at the dysfunctionality of being strong in military terms. The United States have 1/2 of the global spending on arms, but they can't win a war anymore. Yeah. So what is the right size? Our attention is now being paid to the small nations, like Sweden, like Denmark, which are not integrated into a common monetary system, but that have, or Switzerland, have defended their monetary autonomy. They are small, they can specialize, they can form consensus very early. They have a sort of potential for democratic politics that can do without the enormous amounts of money that are needed in the United States to run an election campaign. So that's an interesting question. But if you're small, you also can be dependent. If I look at this country, of which I don't know too much, the peoples of the former Yugoslavia have at some stage in the late 1980s, early 1990s decided that they wanted to be smaller as states. They didn't want to be a big state. Yeah? Now they are small and they are wondering, is this good for us or bad? Some of them want, or all of them, I noticed, want to get back into the European Union as an even larger unit to seek protection there. This is not unusual. The Baltic states, for example, do exactly that. But then it is, again, a complicated game between autonomy and integration, because almost all of the countries of the European Union, small or large, but in particular the small ones, never think that they will give up their national sovereignty. They want to join the European Union in order to protect their national sovereignty. Take a place like Lithuania, who are sort of scared stiff of Russia. They want to be part of NATO and the European Union, but not in order to be governed by Brussels. They have not fought for decades to govern themselves in order just to give up their capacity to govern to some bureaucracy in Belgium. No way. Yeah. The only country in Europe that wants to really give up its sovereignty in Europe is just Germany. And they sort of confuse a European Germany, which they want, with a German Europe, which is actually what happens if they continue the way they do. So That leads me, so states have become a critical issue of modernization. What is the right size of a state, and how do states have to relate to each other in order to recover some sort of governability in a global market? Yeah? Is Denmark the answer? Is Lithuania the answer? Or is the United States the answer? And then, of course, there are historical trajectories. You cannot easily decide, let's say here on the Balkans, to become a second United States. There is a sort of historical constraint here. This reminds me of a book by Putnam on Italian regions and civic culture, relationship between civic culture and economic competitiveness and success, where he's asked, so he shows that in northern Italy there's a hundreds of years tradition of civic engagement, civic cohesion, self-governance, which is almost a guarantee for the capacity of these regions, unless they are disturbed from above, to maintain some sort of prosperity. Whereas the South is a different world, and the South is a world where such social cohesion does not exist. Then Putnam was asked, what is the conclusion from this? What do you advise communities in the Italian South? And he thought about it and said, well, the only advice I could give them is get a different history. Now that's cruel. That's cruel. At the same time, it reminds us of the historical constraints that exist for action in the places in which we live and to which we belong, and the need to understand these constraints and then make the best out of it. But just like in an economic model, say now we do an economic modernization without considering that we are special as everybody else is special, and that there are historical legacies that we cannot share. That is a big mistake. So much on modernization. Now I will say a few words on the European Union, my fourth topic, and again emphasize the high degree of uncertainty, instability. Up to a few years ago, there was a sort of tacit understanding that the finalité of European integration, as the French call it, was some sort of a European superstate. Now it wouldn't come tomorrow, but it was the inevitable march of progress towards this. As Jacques Delors once celebrated his own achievement as head of the European Commission, now he said 80% of the laws in the countries of the European Union are actually made in Brussels and not in these countries. Yeah? Which, if you're interested in national autonomy, you might be alarmed about it. He was really happy about it because he is French, and the French like sort of a strong state at the center governing society. So the finalité was relatively clear. Nobody talked about it necessarily, because if you talk about it, then the very different ideas that different countries have about why they are in Europe would come to the fore. The Irish are in Europe because they want to be independent from the British. Before they joined the European Union, it was not clear where the sovereignty of Ireland was. Now they sit at the European table, and so they look straight into the eye of the British Prime Minister as an equal. That's why they want it. Yeah? The French want it because the French think that they are sort of the best diplomats and the best long-term strategists, and they also have a force de frappe, whereas the Germans have all these wonderful automobile factories and all the money in the banks. If we can integrate them into Europe, we have the muscles of the Germans and the brain of the French, and then guess where the whole thing goes. Yeah. Now you can go through all the various countries, and you can see that everybody has a special idea about Europe. If you talk about it openly, there's havoc, there's enormous conflict. Therefore, we used not to talk. Now we have to talk about it. Now we see, after the Brexit, where the British sort of for the first time reversed the trend toward integration, that we need to find consensus about what we want to do with this thing. And now it turns out we don't know. Remember the Bratislava summit, where they came out with sort of an idea like, we want to build up a European military that is so capable of intervening all over the world. And it's a typically French idea, believing that the Germans will pay for it. But the Germans won't pay for it, they only signed the communique. Yeah? So much for that. At the same time, inside Europe, we observe, and this is what I want to conclude with, because it's very relevant for your own discussion on Europe. Inside Europe, we now have two layers of integration. One is European Monetary Union under the euro and under the European Central Bank, and on the other hand, it's the sort of old-fashioned European Union, where you just be a member, but you have your own currency and your own monetary autonomy. The idea on the part of the integration fanatics is that everybody who is in the European Union will at some stage have to adopt the euro. In fact, this guy Schulz, who is one of my special friends, as you will have noticed when I talk about him, the day after the Brexit vote, he went to the microphones and he said, finally, the British are gone. Now we can make joining the euro obligatory for every member of the European Union. He was basically told to shut up in order not to make things even more difficult. Yeah? The Danes, I can assure you, are very happy with not having the euro, and so are the Swedes. And the Finns would very much like to have their own currency back. So there's these two layers. It is important to understand that they involve different definitions of statehood and state independence and governance and so on. Within the euro, very strong constraints are imposed on countries in terms of fiscal policy and monetary policy. In fact, monetary policy is completely taken away from them, and fiscal policy basically also under the European, so-called European semester. So they are sort of governed from the top. Why do countries do this? Why do they accept this? There's two motivations here. And one is the classical motivation. France and Italy, when they forced Germany to agree to the European Monetary Union, because it was not a German invention, although it works for the Germans. Yeah? And the reason there was that the elites of these countries thought that by importing into their political economies a hard currency monetary policy, they could force their societies to modernize. That is to wipe out the communist trade unions and finally have no inflation anymore and no budget deficits, become real strong economic powers like Germany. Yeah? You know, one has to remember this. This was the idea, to sort of domesticate your own domestic political economy in a sort of neoliberal modern economic sense. Now, the promise that came with this was that after a period of bitter medicine, as it is called, that you have to feed to the unknowing people at the bottom who don't really understand economics. They don't understand why they must be fired in order to have a job. Yeah, it's a complicated mental operation. So they are too dumb to understand this. The point is that this did not work. And if you now look at the countries inside European Monetary Union, you see growing disparities between income, employment, unemployment between countries. Germany, the Netherlands, Austria being the winners, the rest being the bitter losers. There's no convergence at all. There's growing divergence, and it has been there since 2008, after the credit bonanza was over. That began when everybody entered the European Union. Now the northern Mediterranean rim is beginning to turn into the poorhouse of Europe, whereas Germany is becoming the powerful center of prosperity, in this united Europe. It's a disaster. I'm saying that coming from Germany, it's a disaster because the most important political result is mutual hatred between our peoples. And if you now go to Spain or Portugal or wherever, and they are from Germany, then they will immediately tell you that you are so rich and they are so poor and you should do something for them. It is, and that's something that can only have one consequence, which is an even stronger AfD in the German electorate, because they will resist it. With good reason in the following sense. We have imposed on us a balanced budget constitution. We can no longer take up debt. We have to sort of do all sorts of things in order to slim down. Why shouldn't they slim down? And so now the idea that you can buy in external constraints, what the Italians call vincolo esterno, in order to impose on your political economy, with the help of Brussels and Berlin and Frankfurt, discipline, in the sense that they accept neoliberal reforms, in becoming poorer now, with the prospect of in the future becoming as rich as the Germans, that is a completely discredited concept. It will not work. And in particular, even if it is true that some countries will have to go through some internal devaluation, they may have too high wages, they may have too much employment in the public sector in order to survive in a competitive economy. If they cannot support this internal devaluation with some degree of external devaluation by redefining the value of their currency, there is no example, as Mark Blythe has shown in a wonderful book on austerity, there is not a single example of a country that could have solved the problem by internal devaluation alone. You need the additional capacity to manipulate your currency value, and this is what is completely disappeared. I close with the following reference to both John Maynard Keynes, the economist, and Karl Polanyi, the economic historian, and looking at the gold standard model of the time before the First World War and the attempt to reinstall the gold standard in the world economy after 1918, they come to the conclusion, independently from each other, that there's no way of combining a gold standard with democracy. Either you can have democracy or you can have a gold standard, but you can't have both. Because if you want to stick to a gold standard, you have to repress the demands of your own people for some sort of economic stability and prosperity with the promise that at some stage in the future, which is undefined, nobody knows, stability and prosperity will return. It is impossible. You have to end in the Hayekian way, as I described. You have to end democracy, decouple democracy from the political economy if you want this. Therefore, my final sentence, if you think about integration into Europe, think about it in two ways. Maybe for a country like Serbia, being a member of the European Union may be useful. It can sort of help keep the peace on the Balkans or whatever, but NATO does it even better. It's more dangerous also, you have to go to the Iraq to help the Americans. But if you go into monetary union, yeah, first of all, you lose your capacity to do something for your own economic fate. And secondly, you will not only will you not see convergence, you will see increasing divergence, as we see now. Because, here's my final quote, capitalism works according to the Matthew principle. The Matthew principle is formulated by none other than Jesus Christ in the Gospel according to Matthew 25:29. where he says, "He who has will be given, and he who has not will be taken away whatever he has." And I assure you, that's the logic of capitalism.
Thank you very much, Professor Streeck, for this excellent and inspiring lecture. And I would like to open the floor for discussion now. I would like to invite the audience to pose questions or comment on the lecture. Please do not hesitate. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for a very optimistic view of our present and our future. We are aware of bleak realities, and this country is certainly one of those which is going through those bleak realities, even without being a member of either the European monetary system or being a member of the EU. Where do you see the one thing you didn't give us is a slide, is an insight into where are we heading now? The discrepancies between the rich north and poor south, and I lived in Greece for a number of years, so I'm perfectly aware of how the delight of seeing the German tourists descend and spend their money there in the summers, somewhere in 2008, 2009, started to turn sour, and indeed it is not as pleasant as it used to be. So, and you have just told us this medicine is not working. So, what could possibly work, and what are the possible avenues through which we could get there? Because sliding down the way we are is certainly not an option.
Sure. No, if I knew a precise answer to this, I would open up a consulting agency, and I would need to hire some wealth defense specialist afterwards, because I would make so much money on it. No, my job is not forecasting, and it is not strategy beyond some very broad funnel of ideas. And they're not necessarily systematically connected, because the world that we're facing is in a state of very rapid change, not necessarily reorganization. It could be sort of anomic dispersion. Therefore, traditional sort of chains of causation are not reliable anymore. So what I could have made more explicit is the literature on modernization, on social modernization in the 1960s, 1970s, in optimistic period. Compare it today to what we now know about modernization. You see that all these wonderful assumptions, you have to have democracy, you have to have citizenship, you have to have urbanization, and then you have to have education and so on. It's all gone. Yeah? The recipes may still be in some sense true, but try to apply them in Nigeria. Yeah? The world on its peripheral fringes is in a state of decomposition. Now, what happens in a state of decomposition? First of all, you have to calculate that all sorts of things can happen that you cannot predict. That's a very important insight, because the strategy then is to cover against unexpected accidents. Yeah? Another thing is, what I said during the lecture, I believe it is really important that you understand your location if you want to act as a collectivity. You understand your location in the political geography and in history, and then try to make the best out of it. There's entrepreneurialism in a good sense. That is to understand what we can do. Take the Danes. The Danes were basically an agrarian society. They were sort of producing bacon for the English breakfast table. And that made them rich. But at some stage, the English sort of switched to muesli, and they don't have bacon in the morning. So what do the Danes do? They invest in education, they invest in high-tech consulting, they invest in information technology, and so on. They're doing extremely well.
And they made Danish feta.
Yeah.
Feta cheese.
Yeah, absolutely. All these things that are so Danish, at the same time they go outside. In other words, that would require that there's some what I would call patriotic entrepreneurialism in a society. If your entrepreneurial people sort of disappear and they go to some other place, and if you go to university, then decide that all I want is go to the United States, then this country loses its talent. So a question would be, how can you keep the talent in the place where you want to do something, and so on and so on. These are not recipes, but they point to sort of a style of action that may be important. There's no guarantee for this. I've started by telling you that the future of capitalism is uncertain. Yeah? It could well be that we are facing another 2008 in 2 or 3 years, and then everybody will be in very deep shit. And what then? I don't know. Yeah? I was impressed when I worked on industrial policy with small countries sort of thriving on their joint traditions, the relative equality of their citizens, because in a small country you can't be that rich. The kind of oligarchy that you have in the United States. In effect, Danish oligarchs, if they exist, are already in New York. Yeah, they live in one of those Fifth Avenue. So that would be a possibility. More I can't say. It's a hard struggle. And I understand from what I've learned during these 2 days here, that it's a hard struggle for a country like this in particular. And I don't, especially if you're in a situation where you become completely dependent on foreign investment in relatively low-tech industries. That can snap. Another thing that I think is politically relevant and also theoretically may not have immediate action consequences is that what you do now, anything you do now, has an important impact on what you can do 2 or 3 years later. In other words, there's enormous path dependence. A mistake that one makes now is very difficult to eradicate in the future. And then you have the Putnam problem, had a different history.
Well, I had a question myself. How does your perspective on the end of imminent capitalism relate to the whole body of literature, the world system theory, and the school of Emanuel Wallerstein, which does not have such a pessimistic projection for capitalism? In fact, while it is pessimistic in a different way, by which I mean that instead of like capitalism slowly falling into disarray, it will shift its center to Asia and will start expanding, into newly industrializing regions like sub-Saharan Africa, so that it can actually compensate for these trends, these downward trends, at least for a while. So, do you see this possibility at all, and how do you relate to this perspective?
So, Emanuel Wallerstein now expects the final battle between what he calls the forces of Porto Alegre and the forces of Davos, in about 20 years. And then a decision will be made as to the end of capitalism in the battle. I think that is not, he's not as optimistic as you describe him. He sees that there's something going on.
Not optimistic at all.
Yeah. He sees that there's something going on. But I think he misunderstands the way in which a social system deteriorates and decomposes. It doesn't need a battle between the forces of the future and the forces of the past. It can disintegrate on its own. Yeah? And then you get into a period that I call in a book that is now coming out, the interregnum, a period in which nobody is really in charge. And where the strangest things, the concept of interregnum is from Antonio Gramsci, and where he speaks, and he defines an interregnum as a period in which the most bizarre things can happen. Yeah? And if I look at Donald Trump, I think you're already in the dragon. Yeah. Nobody would have expected. Nobody would have expected only 10 years ago that such a thing would be possible. Yeah. And nobody would have expected that in a country like the United States, suddenly there is, in the middle of the country, a huge stretch of landscape which is ridden with poverty and despair among the white population that used to be the mainstay of Americanism. Yeah? So my point is, the end of capitalism is a possibility in the sense that we are unable to recover the necessary governability of this economic system. Now you're asking about Asia and about there. I think I'm now pretty sure that the following dilemma applies. Capitalism, and there Wallerstein is completely right, also Arrighi, capitalism needs a carrier nation or a carrier center, a host nation. And in the history of capitalism you see different sort of hegemonic carrier nations taking turns. Begins with Florence, if you will. Then moves on to Amsterdam, moves on to London, from there to New York and Wall Street. All of these hegemonic powers had not just military, and not just money. They had very importantly and a financial industry that was recognized all over. Like the florin is a Florentine coin, which was the most important coin in early modern Europe. They also have military power, yeah? And up to the point where military power is basically important to collect your bills. If someone owes you something, you have to be able to send an aircraft carrier. Then they pay. Yeah? And so, you can put it a little bit less cynical, and you say, you have to be able to extend your own legal system to the rest of the world, which is exactly what the United States are doing. Yeah? So, law, in the ultimate point, law is physical force, because the police is behind it, in this case the army, but on the surface it is not seen, it is sort of justice. Yeah? Behind the surface it's violence. And so if you if you look at this segment, there's not only that money comes with economic power comes with military power, it also comes with cultural leadership. Yes. Yeah? In order to have hegemony, in the sort of there was a time when everybody, let's say in the music industry, Mozart, everybody spoke Italian. Yeah. Now we're at some stage people speak French. Now we're in a world in which everybody speaks English. We speak English. Can you imagine we would be speaking Chinese? It's completely unimaginable. Can you imagine that the Chinese lifestyle would become the attractive lifestyle of the rest of the world, like today the soft power of the United States? I think it's completely inconceivable. But then, who is going to play this role at a time when the Americans sort of are indebted up to their ears and they print their own money and they can't win wars anymore? Yeah? Who's going to do this? I don't see anyone. This is my point of an anomic situation. One more thing on the developing countries. Now, the rising countries. Before 2008, I think 2005, some bond salesman at Goldman Sachs, it's always Goldman Sachs, he invented the term BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Yeah? In order to bundle these debt obligations and sell them in a package. And the slogan was, this is the rising new capitalism. After 2008, the politicians sort of discovered this guy and his slogan, And if you look back at the document, when G20 meetings took place, it was all over. The BRICS are going to save us. The BRICS are growing, whereas we are in problems. But once the BRICS are really taking off, we will again be good. Now look at the BRICS. Look at Brazil, mired in corruption, the worst economic crisis they had for decades. A political system that is disintegrating, short of civil war. Look at Russia. Russia was the sort of growth pole of the East. Now it is a sick man. Yeah. India, I don't know anything about. China is the big mystery, but unable to become, in my view, the carrier nation of a new version of capitalism. Indeed, one can argue that the reason why they became so powerful was exactly that their capitalism was embedded in the dictatorial state-run system and so on. And South Africa is a basket case. It never belonged into this.
So it's usually omitted from this.
Yeah, now it's omitted. It never belonged in this group. Yeah. So it's not so easy to find the successors to Western capitalism in a world of high technology and all. It's not so easy. These candidates are not the candidates for.
Yes, please.
I have the following. Actually, I was surprised by your last comment, your suggestion that Serbia should join the EU but not the monetary union. I wonder if the problem is not in the single market rather than in the monetary union. I mean, how can a union based on the idea of free competition between countries of different levels of development
Good point.
advantage less countries?
Good point. I noticed that there is an argument to join the European Union in order to settle the international conflicts on the Balkans, like the sort of Austrian-Italian problem in the Tyrol, where now, since the border is open, the question of the independence of South Tyrol from Italy is no longer a problem. It could be that this would be, otherwise I think you're right. It's a very complex story why the former communist countries want to be in the European Union. There is a hope for some sort of subsidies, structural funds, but you can extract those funds also by indicating that you might just as well play with the Russians, and then they will sort of do something for you, maybe, maybe not. Then there is immigration. For example, the reason why a country like Poland is so eager to be a member of the European Union is that they can send their surplus labor to the rest of the European Union, and they receive a lot of transfer, pay money through this. And there's all sorts of reasons, and they have to be carefully calculated. Maybe there's not a good case for joining the European Union because of this. That's something that you yourself have to determine. But if you enter the European Union, at the present stage, don't be scared by someone like Juncker telling you, yeah, you can come in only if you also join monetary. If you join monetary,
a condition for other reasons.
Yeah, it is now the condition. But I tell you, Poland isn't in. And others say they want to get in, but they are willing not to, they are determined not to do it. Some others are maybe going out of monetary union. My guess would be that Italy can no longer live under the rules of this, and Italy is such a bad shape that allowing for the uncertainties and impossibilities that may happen, Italy may in 5 years no longer be in the European Union. Joseph Stiglitz, who is after all Nobel Prize winner in economics, predicts exactly that. In 5 years Italy will be out. If Italy is out, Greece will be out, Spain will be out, Portugal maybe also. And then there may even be the possibility of a southern euro as opposed to a northern euro. All sorts of things are open, all bets are open. And I think things will happen of which we still believe that they are impossible.
You know the interesting case of Montenegro, which is in the Eurozone,
Yeah.
is not in the EU.
Yeah, I know. This is the sort of the new architecture of the state system, which allows for all sorts of surprises.
Yes. More questions?
Okay,
Well,
let's have dinner.
thank you very much for coming.